Thank you very much indeed to the hosts for such a warm introduction, and very great thanks for asking me to come back again. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be talking to you again today, and I'm always keen to interact with members of the Mito Action community. So, what am I going to talk to you about today then? Well, the organisers were keen to hear a little bit more about how we're moving mitochondrial medicines to patients, and also a little bit about our STRIDE study that's coming up now. And so those are the two main things I'd like to cover. And in particular, the organisers asked us about the news flow that we put out around our orphan designation and Fasttrack status. So those are the two regulatory areas that I'm going to focus on, just to give you the background and help understand how this works for us all. So a little bit about Reneo. Some of you have met us before, but for those of you who haven't, we're a small biopharmaceutical company based in San Diego, focusing on mitochondrial medicines. And as you can read from the slide, our mission is to address the main challenges of patients who have these genetic metabolic myopathies, with the goal of improving endurance so that you all have less fatigue and feel better overall. But it's much more elegantly put on the slide for you there. So, moving medicines to move you. Well, as you all know, the FDA is a world-class regulatory agency. And one of the things that they've taken very seriously is the need to support patients as well as companies in getting good medicines faster. So as long as you've got a good medicine coming through, these will apply. And they have a number of toolkits and options that companies can consider very carefully, and if they feel appropriate, apply. So they're not a done deal. We have to apply and we have to prove why a program is worth being given one of these designations or more. As I say, it's a toolkit, so it's pick and mix. There are things in the toolkit that we might use at one time that may not be appropriate, and then may not be appropriate later on. Or we may pick other tools as the program develops and we move on in our understanding of the drug and how it could help patients. So if you just hold that thought that these are tools and we choose the most appropriate one at the time, then I think that should work quite well. So we've been very fortunate. The data that we've generated have allowed us to apply for two of these tools. One is the orphan designation, which I'll speak about a little bit more in a moment, and the other is Fasttrack status. So we take nothing for granted, and these things are a gift of the FDA, subject to us demonstrating worthiness of them, and they could be taken away if we fail to continue showing that worth. So again, bear that in mind. So orphan designation, there are some very specific criteria for a number of conditions where the conditions get left behind or orphaned because they're not very big diseases, they don't affect very many patients, and they're quite difficult to research. So understandably, many companies will try to focus on areas where they might be serving higher numbers of patients, or they might have more options for research. But from the point of view of what is an orphan, what does this mean? The FDA has a really nice definition, which I put up on the slide for you. So in our context, for Reneo, this applies to drugs that are intended to either prevent, not us, diagnose, not us, or treat diseases or conditions that affect fewer than 200,000 people in the United States. So we are trying to develop a drug for the treatment of primary mitochondrial myopathy, which definitely affects, as you all know better than we do, fewer than 200,000 people in America. And that's really a very small number, isn't it, compared to the overall population? So you can see the challenge. We were very fortunate in that we were able to evidence the approximate numbers of patients in the United States with the condition, and also evidence the treatment paradigm at the moment, which is essentially that there aren't any approved treatments, and that you all rely in the Mito community on various cocktails of vitamins and supplements and so on to do the very best that you can to help your conditions. So with the package of data that we were able to put together, FDA very graciously granted us orphan designation late last year for the treatment of primary mitochondrial myopathy. Well, you could say big deal. So what does, we know that there aren't very many Mito patients, and we know that there aren't any treatments for us at the moment. What does this mean? Why does it matter? Well, the thing about it is that's important really is that the designation, speaking in general terms now, is intended to encourage companies to really put the effort in to focus on these unmet need areas where patients are not being served by any other products really, and there's very little research going on. So the whole point is to encourage companies to come forward and work in these difficult areas. It's, as I said earlier, it's not a done deal though. We've demonstrated why we qualified today, and then we need to keep demonstrating that every year with a progress report to the FDA. And if they don't think we're trying hard enough, they can take the designation away. So believe me, we'll be trying very hard indeed, because we want to get this medicine well researched to understand what it can do. And if it's appropriate, to seek a license for it to help the mitochondrial medicine population. In addition to seeking an orphan designation to help us with our research and supporting that research programme, there are a number of other tools. There are 4 specifically available in the FDA's expedited programmes toolkit. It's a grand name, isn't it? And I'm going to talk in particular about one that we've been granted, but I'm also, for the sake of completeness and so that you have a fuller picture, we'll mention the other ones that are available as well, and say why we're not applying for those today, so that you have a better picture about what's going on. So if you're an FDA reviewer, you're a very, very busy person. You have lots of companies lining up with drugs to be reviewed, and you have lots of companies lining up with drugs that could make a difference to patients. So naturally, you need to be able to do your job, which is review the drugs thoroughly and in a timely fashion. But you also need a way, don't you, to be able to triage perhaps the drugs for areas where there could be a really big difference to patient groups, particularly where there's nothing else available. And that's really what these designations are about. So it's about helping get a thorough review done in a timely way so that patients are not deprived of drugs due to a lengthy review period. So we applied for Fasttrack designation, and we were fortunate enough to get it. So what does that mean? First of all, we had to demonstrate that REN001 is a drug that is intended to treat a very serious condition, and there's nobody who knows better about that than all of you, and that we'd already generated some data to underpin our arguments. And I'll come to that a bit later on, and then be able to show how, if everything progressed in the clinical trials according to plan, we would be able to support the need for a fast-track designation. So we're trying to develop a medicine to treat a serious condition, and we're trying also to demonstrate through the clinical trial that we'll be running that the medicine has the potential to address the unmet medical needs that you all know better than I do, and help patients with primary mitochondrial myopathy move better, less fatigue, more endurance, and have a better quality of life in those because of those improvements. The alternative for completeness, of course, because I shouldn't give you a partial picture here, is that if we were developing, or if a company is developing a drug for an infectious disease, then that might also be given fast track designation. And what this really means from a practical point of view is, going back to our assessor who's really, really busy, is that they have a process to speed up the review. So they still do a very, very thorough review, but they do it in chapters, if you like. As we finish each part of the programme, they can take a good look at it and start making out their lists of questions and the things that they want to ask us about, rather than having the whole book delivered to them at the end. And so it's a partnership where we work together to provide and review the data as we generate them, the so-called rolling review. And some of you will read about that in the press for other products. As I've said, there's a health warning for us as a sponsor. If we don't keep pushing our programme forward and we don't show that we're doing our best to develop this drug in as sensible a fashion as possible, then the FDA can say, thanks a lot, don't waste our time, and we're going to rescind the fast track designation. So there is obviously pressure on us to keep going and keep doing our job to the best that we can. And of course we would anyway. but it all helps, doesn't it? So I just thought it would be useful for you to see the sorts of drugs that have had fast track success for patients, because that's what this is about, isn't it? It's getting the medicines to patients faster. And I thought it would be, so I just looked at what had been granted up to December last year. And these are just the first few examples that came up, and some of them might look familiar. So there was a metastatic breast cancer treatment. There was something for spinal muscular atrophy, which is a horrible condition affecting small children. And again, absolutely no treatments available for it. And unsurprisingly, there were a number for COVID infections, which is very topical at the moment, isn't it? And perhaps closer to our community, Dojolvi got a fast track success for the treatment of long chain fatty acid oxidation disorder. So the fast track designation can be granted to all sorts of products, but the key things are that they meet the criteria that I shared with you earlier, and they're going to make a difference to patients. So FDA reading the data as chapters and making their commentary is worth their while compared to them waiting for the whole book to be finished, which is our whole research program. So, and I've given you a web link in a later slide if any of you are interested in going and having a look at the sorts of drugs that got approved last year or indeed in previous years. I'm now coming to, for the sake of completeness, I'm now going to just comment on some of the other tools in the FDA toolkit. So breakthrough designations included there. That's really for something that's going to be a drug that's going to be treating a really serious condition for which preliminary clinical data, which are often quite limited, show that the drug is going to have a really big difference in effect compared to what's already available. And typically these are cancer treatments where a new mechanism of action comes up or a totally new way of approaching the cancer is identified. And you'll be very aware that patients who have cancer don't have time. And so this is a particularly appropriate designation for that patient group, although other drugs do fall into this from time to time. But going back through the lists over a few years, 2020 was typical, and that the majority of those sorts of products are cancer treatments. Accelerated approval. Well, this is an interesting one as well. So slightly subtle difference here. It's a drug for a serious condition, and it also shows some sort of very meaningful advantage over other therapies that are already available. And the key here is that it's using a surrogate endpoint. So again, if you had, for example, if you were developing a blood pressure drug because controlling people's blood pressure hopefully will stop them from having strokes, you wouldn't want to wait to count the number of strokes that happened in the comparison group on dummy drug versus the group that are being treated with your drug. You'd want to use blood pressure, measuring blood pressure and controlling blood pressure as the surrogate to cut down on the time it takes to bring that drug forward, because measuring blood pressure is known, because blood pressure control is known to be associated with reduction in stroke. So the blood pressure measurement is the surrogate, and the disease that you're trying to avoid here or prevent is stroke. And some of this might be a bit confusing, and I will be taking questions at the end. So please, if you do have any questions, hold those thoughts and we'll come back to it. But again, this is a sometimes used approach because you have to have a well-known surrogate marker like measuring blood pressure, and it has to be validated in the condition that you're trying to either treat or prevent, for example, stroke. So 12 drugs that were newly approved in 2020 used that route. And again, they were often cancer drugs based on surrogates for survival, such as progression-free interval or something like that. Priority review. Now, this is an interesting one because it doesn't apply to us today because we have not yet generated our package, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed because this is an application for a drug that treats a serious condition and, if approved, would provide a significant improvement in safety or effectiveness of the drug. So as we stand today, Reneo is embarking on a new trial, so we don't have that data yet. But I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we might one day qualify for this, but I don't know yet. And examples, again, unsurprisingly, you know what I'm going to say. When I look back at the data for last year, that about half, or just over half of the new drugs that were approved under the priority review scheme were again for cancer for the reasons I've already explained. So a company can take advantage of more than one regulatory tool and can dip into the toolbox to use the ones that are most appropriate at the time, and they're not mutually exclusive. And I think it's just amazing the way the FDA has set these programs up to help us all, because it helps us develop the drugs. And the whole point of that is it helps us get drugs to patients faster. And if you are interested in which sort of drugs came through and why they came through, please do take a look at the web link that I put on this slide to help you. I had put a slide up next for questions, but I've been advised by the organisers that we perhaps should wait till the end and do them in one go. So bear with me while I skip over this one. And I'm now going to progress to tell you a little bit about our molecule, REN001, and why we thought this might be a useful drug to develop for patients with primary mitochondrial myopathy. So our molecule, REN001, is a really interesting drug. It works, you've heard of PPARs, and I know that many of you will know a lot about them because you do a lot of reading, a lot of research yourself. But it works in a really interesting way. It works, assuming that my arrow is working, to increase fatty acid oxidation. And that's important to us all, because when we want to do something and get going, say I look over my shoulder and see that a lion is about to start chasing me, it'll be glucose I use first, but that will only last for a very short time while my fatty acid oxidation is kicking in to provide me with fuel to power up my batteries and get me going. So I need the fatty acid oxidation to work. And we know that in patients with primary mitochondrial myopathy, skipping ahead a little bit to what I'm going to say on the next slide as well, this doesn't work so well. So that's how the drug works. And that's really exciting, because if it can work in primary mitochondrial myopathy, it should help boost that energy supply. And that's the premise on which this works, really. So moving on to primary mitochondrial myopathy, we've already covered the fact that it's a very rare disease and needs a treatment. So that's one reason for looking for a drug that would work in this condition. And critically for PMM, as you all know very well, this is a genetic condition caused by mutations in both mitochondrial and nuclear DNA. And those encode the proteins that help this machinery work, whereby fatty acid oxidation occurs efficiently, and we've got the power and the energy to run away from that lion that's now roaring at us in the distance. The lack of this energy, though, and the ability to switch this on and get that energy through, as you all know, leads to both issues with your muscles. So you don't have the endurance you might want. You can't walk as far as you might like. Getting around the supermarket, we call it something different in America, is a difficulty. Going to Walmart and walking up and down the very long aisles wears you out. The muscles can hurt, and I know you will have a lot of fatigue on a bad day. So these are the things that we hope the drug could fix by powering up this part of the cycle and getting more of those fatty acids oxidized and available to provide energy. And of course, there is no treatment. So it would be great, wouldn't it, if companies could come forward and develop a treatment that works for all of you. So the rationale then is that the way that REN001 works, in theory, should be very suitable for patients with mitochondrial myopathy. And so we took that into some lab tests in test tubes. We took it through to some animal models, some healthy volunteer work to make sure that the drug was reasonably well tolerated and could also do what we thought from the point of view of mechanism in healthy volunteers. And then, as you know from colleagues who've previously spoken to this community, we also ran a very small patient study, which did confirm improvements both in endurance and how patients felt. Excuse me. So that was brilliant, because that information together gave us a story that we could understand, that logically flowed through and made sense. And that was the information that we shared with the regulators to apply for the Orphan designation and the Fasttrack designations. And that was brilliant when they were granted. Excuse me croaking at you. So what comes next then? Well, we are now, late breaking news, we're now enrolling in our REN 001201 STRIDE study. And this is what we're putting into place now to try and generate the evidence to underpin the drug and to underpin all of the work that we've done so far, in the hope that we demonstrate that the drug works in patients and makes a difference to you. So what's the study about? Oh, no, I have to do the disclaimer first, forgive me. So this study is funded by a drug company. It's funded by us, Reneo Pharma Limited. I have to emphasize that REN 001 is a study drug only. It's not available outside this study, this research program. The whole point of the study is to confirm the safety and efficacy of the drug. So we haven't done that yet. And so therefore, we don't know whether the drug will be approved. That's the point of the study, and we need to do the work first. And the information that I'm going to share with you is posted on clinicaltrials.gov, and I would encourage you to go and have a look there when you want to and you've got time. So, as you can read, we have a nice long title for our study, and the title reflects the design of the study, which I'll come to in some detail in a moment. And for those of you who want to have a look, these are the identifiers and where you'll find the information about it. So what sort of patients are suitable for the study? Well, we're looking for adults aged over 18 years who could be male or female. They need to have primary mitochondrial myopathy, which is very carefully defined by an international workshop. So this is a definition that's recognised around the world now, which is great. And in a nutshell, patients need to have defined mitochondrial DNA mutations. We are only studying mitochondrial DNA, so please bear that in mind. The characteristic of the illness for the right sorts of patients for the drug, given how I've explained it works, will be those who have exercise intolerance or active muscle pain when exercising. So walking up and down the aisles at Walmart or something like that will give you some pain, or it'll be difficult. Critically, because of the way we've set the study up and the things we're testing, patients do need to be able to walk independently. You can have a stick or a roller, a walking aid of some sort, but you cannot have another person helping you to walk. So that's independent walking. And of course, as some of you will ask us, if a lady is capable of getting pregnant, then she would need to be prepared to use highly effective contraception. And that's standard for most studies of investigational drugs. So what does our study look like? Well, we're running it in a lot of centres. I'm going to say 38 today, but it might be more or might be less after that. But we're aiming for about 38 at the moment. It's running in a number of countries. It's a double-blind study, so none of us know whether the patients are getting active drug or getting dummy placebo. And there are two groups of patients, one getting active and one getting placebo. As I say, we won't know which are which going through the study together. Patients will receive either active drug once a day or placebo once a day, and they'll take this for 24 weeks with food. I've already said we're looking for adults, males and females. Genetic mutations, mitochondrial, intolerance, muscle pain, able to walk, and effective contraception to avoid pregnancy. What are we going to measure? Well, this will start to make sense now, given what I've said. We're going to measure, very simply, the change in how far patients can walk from the start of the study to the end of the study as a measure of endurance and fatigue. It's a very simple measure, but that's the thing that matters, isn't it? Can I get round Walmart? Or is that just too much for me with my condition? And that will tell it, that will help us, because it will tell us about the impact of the drug on fatigue, endurance, and actually the impact on the activities of daily living, the things we all have to do every single day. The secondary endpoints that we're going to measure are the how you feel when you're taking the drug. So changes in your physical functioning, muscle symptoms, and your well-being as measured by patient-reported outcomes. So this is what you think, collected on questionnaires. Obviously, we're going to be watching safety all the time and making sure we know what's going on. And we're also going to be assessing the pharmacokinetics. So that means how much drug is in the blood at different times of the day after a once daily dose. We'll also do some exploratory assessments of just how much quality of life might be improved, because clearly our previous studies were very small, and we want to see if the positive changes we saw are carried forward into a much bigger study and a bigger population of patients. So, as I said, for information on this, please do visit the clinicaltrials.gov website or the Mito Action website, where Mito Action has very kindly also put some information about the study up there. And on that, I will now invite questions. But just again, in case I forget my manners, thank you very much indeed for inviting me to speak. Thank you.